Well, let's have some fun before we start back into the Deuteronomy. This is in Numbers chapter 5. It's called The Case of the Suspected Adulteress. It's in Numbers 5. If you have Bibles with you, it's 5:11. I'll give you my translation of it, which differs in a couple of places from the older English translations. And I want you to tell me what is going on the heck in this law. And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, and you shall say to them," now, the law, "Any man whose wife will go astray, and will make a breach of faith with him, and a man has lain with her, an intercourse of seed, and it has been hidden from her husband's eyes, and she has kept concealed, and she has been made impure, and there is no witness against her, and she has not been caught. And a spirit of jealousy has come over him, and he is jealous about his wife, and she has been made impure. Or a spirit of jealousy has come over him, and he is jealous about his wife, and she has not been made impure. Then the man shall bring his wife to the priest, and shall bring her offering along with her, 1/10 of an ephah of barley flour. He shall not pour oil on it, and he shall not put frankincense on it, because it is an offering about jealousies, an offering of bringing to mind, causing a crime to be brought to mind. And the priest shall bring her forward and stand her in front of Yahweh, and the priest shall take holy water in a clay container, and the priest shall take some of the dust that will be on the tabernacle's floor and put it into the water. And the priest shall stand the woman in front of Yahweh and loosen the hair of the woman's head and put the offering of bringing to mind on her hands. It is an offering of jealousies. And in the priest's hand shall be the bitter cursing water. And the priest shall have her swear, and he shall say to the woman, if a man has not lain with you, and if you have not gone astray in impurity with someone in place of your husband, be cleared by this bitter cursing water. But you, if you have gone astray with someone in place of your husband, and if you have been made impure, and if a man other than your husband has had his intercourse with you, then the priest shall have the woman swear a curse oath, and the priest shall say to the woman, let Yahweh make you a curse and an oath among your people when Yahweh sets your thigh sagging and your womb swelling. And this cursing water will come in your insides to swell the womb and make the thigh sag. And the woman shall say, Amen, Amen. And the priest shall write these curses in a scroll and rub them into the bitter water. And he shall have the woman drink the bitter cursing water, and the bitter cursing water will come into her, and the priest shall take the offering of jealousies from the woman's hand and elevate the offering in front of Yahweh, and he shall bring her forward to the altar. And the priest shall take a fistful from the grain offering, a representative portion of it, and burn it to smoke at the altar. And after that he shall have the woman drink the water. When he has had her drink the water, then it will be, if she has been made impure, when the bitter cursing water will come into her, and her womb will swell, and her thigh will sag, then the woman will become a curse among her people. And if the woman has not been made impure, she is pure, then she shall be cleared, and shall conceive seed. This is the instruction for jealousies, when a woman will go astray with someone in place of her husband and be made impure, or when a spirit of jealousy will come over a man and he will be jealous about his wife, and the priest shall stand the woman in front of Yahweh and do all of this instruction to her, and the man shall be clear of a crime, and that woman shall bear her crime. Well, is that about as clear as the water with the stuff in it to everybody? What just happened here? A guy suspects his wife of cheating, but doesn't have proof. They said like in 4 different ways. There's no proof, no witnesses. And everything is strange after that. They don't go to court, they go to a priest. There's no judges. They bring a sacrifice, which you don't normally do in a legal case. The sacrifice is barley, which, by the way, this is the only place where you use a barley sacrifice for this sort of thing. Usually it's other grains. The priest writes words of a curse on paper and then rubs it into holy water. How many times is holy water mentioned in the Hebrew Bible? Once, here. So we don't even know what the heck that is. And then he also takes some dust or dirt from the floor of the tabernacle and he mixes that in too. And she drinks it. And if and when her womb, it's translated in all other translations of the Bible, belly, if her belly swells, I just want you to know the word there means womb. It just does. But let's make it belly just because all the other translations do it. When it swells and her thigh falls, drops, sags, then she's guilty. And what happens from her being guilty? She becomes a curse among her people, whatever that means. And I mean, what would it mean that you're a curse among your people? So let's say she's Sheila. Is there any Sheila here? Then everybody, you know, whenever they're really mad, when they want to curse you, they say, ah, you're a Sheila. May you be like Sheila. You know, something like that. And it notes she's not executed. There's nothing about her being executed. And when elsewhere it's absolutely clear that the punishment for adultery is execution. And then at the last sentence it says, the man will be clear of a crime. And you go, wait a minute. Which man? Which man? The husband or the correspondent? You know, the partner, boyfriend, guy. Now you'd probably say, I don't know, let's take a vote. We'll determine the truth of the Bible by a democratic process. How many of you think that that refers to, it's the husband or the other guy? I assume we have no other choice. It's not God, it's not Moses, it's, okay? How many of you think it's the other guy, the adulterer? Well, some, a few. And how many of you think it's the husband who's clear? Okay. The traditional understanding, since the early post-biblical writers, was it's the husband. But then you say, but of what crime is the husband cleared? What did he do? And they said, libel. He's libeled his wife. He said, she's fooling around. My wife's fooling around, and in a very public way. Now, I'd object to that on the grounds that he hasn't libeled his wife. He suspected her, and he did what the law said. He took her to the priest and did what you were supposed to do. It never says that he said one word to anybody about it. He didn't go at all the neighbors and saying, do you know, none of that. On the other hand, the other guy, there's an issue of a crime because if he's guilty, he committed adultery. But either way, you can't prove that he did. We don't even know if we know who the other guy is. He doesn't say, my wife slept with Joe. It's that, he suspects, but there are no witnesses. Now, the other thing is, to the best of my knowledge, having not tried it, drinking water with ink of curses and dirt does not make a woman or a man, a woman's belly or womb swell and her thigh sag. We could all try it tonight and report back to the class, but I don't think you should have to do that. I know I won't. So there's that. And if it does do that, let us say it's understood to be by some miraculous means, because she goes to a priest and she brings a sacrifice, there aren't usually laws in the Bible that require a miracle to determine the outcome of the law. This would require forever that there be a miracle would have to take place in order to find her guilty or not guilty. Then there's the fact that if this is a trial by ordeal, like, in medieval Europe, they would do this sort of thing. You'd have to hold an iron bar, and if your hands didn't get burnt, you're innocent. Or if you saw Monty Python, that if a woman weighs more than a duck, then she's a witch, and burn her, that sort of thing. But there are no laws of trial by ordeal in the Bible. There are a couple in the law code of Hammurabi, which is a much older law code than the one in the Bible. It was one of the great archaeological discoveries. It was at Nineveh, of course, where everything good came from. Whence everything good came. Hammurabi was the king of Ur, the city whence Abraham comes, and around a similar period, 18th century, a little too early for Abraham. There's a reference to a king, in the Bible there's a person called Amraphel. And it was claimed for all by biblical scholars, and still there may be some out there who do claim that Amraphel is a Hebrewizing of Hammurapi. You say, forget the L because we're trying to make this work. And the guttural H at the beginning, they would make it into a non-guttural H, but it's still possibly guttural in Hebrew. And then the M and the R and the P you've got. So they argued that biblical Amraphel was Hammurabi. And my teacher's teacher, the great William Foxwell Albright, who's the father of American Bible scholarship. Albright was a professor at Johns Hopkins. And in those days, in the 40s and 50s and earliest 60s, if you wanted to be a Bible scholar or an archaeologist of the Near East, you went to Johns Hopkins and you studied with Albright. That's what it was about. And all of my teachers at Harvard, 4 of them, were all students of Albright at Hopkins. And when he died, Harvard became the center. And then Yale and Princeton had, at one point, I think 4 or 5 professors of Bible. They were all students of Albright. Over 100 of us came out of the sub-Albright school of Harvard. And now my students here are like 3rd generation. They're even now 4th and 5th generation Albright great-great-grandchildren. So the American school of Bible scholarship is called the Albright School. And Albright was somewhat critical of people who connected this Amraphel to Hammurabi thing. He said, how do you get from Moses to Middlebury? Take out Osis and put in Iddlebury, he said. Anyway, he was right. There's a point where we, just the game becomes too much of a game, And there is a lot of gamesmanship to scholarship, but at some point you have to stop and say, oh yeah, we're supposed to be trying to get at something here. What's that thing we're trying to get at? What's that word again? Truth, So that's that. So if this is a law of trial by ordeal, then it's the only one. Then you have to say, why do you only do it on the woman? If you suspect a woman has had an affair, why not make a guy who you suspect of having had an affair with a married woman do this thing too? Or, if this really works, why only use it for adultery? If you think a man or a woman has committed theft, why don't you do that? This is great. You could solve all your crimes this way. So this has always been a very tricky thing. There was even a rabbinic possibility was raised in the post-biblical period. They said, let's say a couple's been infertile. They've been unable to have children for a long time. And the woman thinks that it's her, that she's unable to have children. Well, you notice at the end of it, it says, if she's found not guilty, she'll return to her husband and she will bear seed. There's like a reward for having gone through this and successfully. So she's been unable to have children, so what she does is she starts to make her husband jealous. Now, she hasn't had an affair, But she starts leaving, you know, like an extra martini glass on the coffee table and a half-smoked cigar and stuff. So when the husband comes home, he'll suspect her. And then, since she hasn't, in fact, done anything, she'll go to the priest, "Hey, give me the stuff, drink stuff," you know, and nothing happens. She's found not guilty, so now God has to make her pregnant because that's what it says in the law that God has given. So they said a human could force God's hand. Now, this level of complexity that developed here, you know about the guy who comes home to the apartment and he says to his wife, I know you're seeing someone. There's someone else. And she says, no, what are you talking about? I'm here all alone. He says, well, look, there's a half-smoked cigar there. And she says, no, I took up smoking cigars. I really like them now. And I say, well, there's 2 martini glasses. She says, yeah, I had one. I forgot that. I went and I poured myself another one. And he says, I know there's somebody here. And he runs to the window and he sees a guy run downstairs, several floors down, running out of the building, like getting dressed, throwing his jacket on and all. So he pulls the refrigerator over to the window and he pushes it out the window. And it lands on the guy. Next scene, we're up in heaven. And there's 3 guys at the entrance to the pearly gates. And the first guy says, I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't understand this. I came home. I knew my wife was having an affair with somebody. I couldn't let her get away with it, so I pulled the refrigerator over and pushed it down because I saw the guy running away. But the exertion of pulling the refrigerator, I had a heart attack and I died. And there's the second guy, what do you do? He says, I don't know. I don't know what happened. I was running out of my building, late for work, so I was like throwing on my coat and my tie as I went, and suddenly a refrigerator comes out of the sky and lands on me and kills me. And so the third guy, well, what are you doing? He says, I don't know what happened. All I was doing, I was sitting in this refrigerator, minding my own business. But at least it's a topical joke. It's an adultery, a suspecting husband adultery. It doesn't happen that often that you can have just the right. Anyway. So there have been these various solutions. Is it a trial by ordeal? Other people have made other arguments. A colleague of mine made the argument that since drinking water with this stuff in it would not produce these physical effects, the consequence of this trial is to find all women not guilty. And he said that was the function of the law, that socially you don't want that in a society where this kind of thing starts in a family where there's suspicion and mistrust between husband and wife and all, and it festers, and you need some way to resolve it. So they conceive this whole fancy ceremony, and they don't do it at the court. They do it with the priest, because then it's this whole religious ceremony and all, and it finds all women not guilty, and it prevents the community and the husband from attacking her further. And the one advantage of that explanation over all the others of this law is at least it's not requiring a miracle to take place in order to work. At the same time, I don't think for a second that it's right, that they would create this entire situation here, all of this, to deal with all these women, you know, to make everybody not guilty. And also, there's a question of what really does happen with this woman, since it's being specific about the womb or belly and the thigh, and finally it took a woman, biblical scholar, Tikva Frymer-Kensky, who was a great scholar at the U of Chicago, but she's died since then, and she you know, worked with gynecologists and obstetricians. Imagine asking someone who knows anything about this. And she said there is a condition called a prolapsed uterus, where the uterus actually sort of becomes partially unattached and sticks out from outside the woman. And she said it could be that and all. And while on the one hand that was like at least a serious, biologically understandable explanation of the law, it still didn't explain how it would happen that, you know, women who do this and are guilty are going to get a prolapsed uterus. And what if some innocent woman has that happen just because she got it, you know, and then everybody is, that adulteress, you know, Sheila. And I apologize to all the Sheilas in the world. It just came to me. I don't know. Now, let me offer this as an alternative that apparently didn't occur to anybody for 2,000 years in explaining this law. If I came into this room today and I said to all of you, I have some news about my wife. Pretty soon you're all going to see her belly swell and her thigh sag. What would all of you be understanding me to say? What? She's pregnant. Right? I mean, if you heard some people gossiping about a girl in school, and they said, well, I don't want to say anything, and I don't like to spread anything, but I think if you watch, you may soon see her womb swell and her thigh sag. What would everybody who heard that gossip understand that to mean? Pregnancy. Now, it is not true, this thing about the thigh sagging. Women often say this. They say your figure goes after the third kid or the second kid or the fourth kid, something. I'm a man. I don't know. But people say that. And to some extent, it can be true. Because the hips spread after the first child. Forget it. I'm not a gynecologist or an obstetrician. But some of my best friends. Actually, two of my best friends are midwives, actually. But let's consider that. The woman is suspected of having had an affair. It says, when the priest has her say the words, he says, if you've been with another man in place of your husband, which means she hasn't been sleeping with her husband, she's been sleeping with somebody else. Then if she gets pregnant, that's 100% proof of her guilt. So pregnancy is this one thing in human experience which is different from everything else, and therefore has a separate kind of law about it. Because in pregnancy, it can be proof that a person has had sex. Except in one famous case, I know. But I mean, all the other cases. Well, since I made the joke, I mean, as some of you who know your New Testament know, that in one of the Gospels, Joseph suspects Mary when he finds out that she's pregnant, and he and she have not yet had sex. And then it's revealed to him that this was, something else. He's going like, I thought my rival was George. My rival is God? How can you win? I'm just kidding around, folks. So normally, outside of that one questionable, situation for Joseph, it's understood, where that came from. And that answers all the questions we had about this test. Why is it only done to women, not to men? Because if you suspect a man of it, that's why many of you may not know this, but you see, men don't get pregnant. And so it wouldn't prove anything. And why is the man, it said, clear of a crime at the end? I don't think it's the husband. I think it's the other guy. He's cleared even if you do know which guy it is, because you can't prove that he did it. You can only prove that the woman did it. And why is the woman not executed? Because you now know 100% that she did it, but the law elsewhere, you saw it. And we'll go over it. It's in Deuteronomy. It's explicit that you can only convict a person of a capital crime with 2 witnesses. And they were very clear at the beginning of this law, there are no witnesses. So there are situations in life where you can, have real proof without witnesses. And so in America, you always hear arguments of whether something's just circumstantial evidence or substantial and witness type evidence. And so people say, yeah, but what about the thing with the drinking the water and all? If you look carefully at the wording, the drinking the water is not what causes the belly to swell and the thigh to sag. It's the pregnancy that causes that. The drinking the water brings about the curse. Her punishment is there's this curse on her forever, but not that she's executed. And that punishment is not on the man. You notice at the end it says, the man will bear his crime. And if you look earlier, it said the woman will bear her crime. That's why there's no question of executing her or him, but when you see those words ever in the Bible, you're supposed to be able to shiver, ooh, will bear, because when it says you will bear your crime, it means it's between you and God. And you go, well, your day is coming, you know. You think you got off, just hang in there for a while, you'll see. So now let's say the analysis I just gave you is wrong. It's still strange to me that this law was out there for a couple thousand years, where the determination of whether a woman has had sex or not is whether her belly swells, and nobody has ever suggested, no scholar ever that I have found, has ever suggested that it was about pregnancy, even to suggest it and reject it. So, I don't know. And that's why I took the time on this. You take one law and you can spend the same kind of concentration on it that we did on the poetry and the prose of the Bible. The third type of what you get in the Bible is law, and it can be just as complex. Now, fortunately, the tabernacle is gone. Fortunately or unfortunately, it disappeared long ago. It just goes out of the Bible. At one point, you have to go back and say, wait a minute, when was the last time we had the tabernacle? It just disappears out of the story. No one knows what happened to it. But once that happened, they couldn't do this ceremony anymore. So this law hasn't been practiced for so long, like maybe 2,500 years at least, that I think that's why people have such a hard time with it. It just hasn't been done. Nobody has ever seen it. Nobody's great-great-great-great-grandparents has ever seen it. So we have just no way of knowing what it was. But it's strange to me what people consider and what they don't when they do this. Yeah?
My Bible translates it as her abdomen will swell and her womb will miscarry. Is that like a common interpretation?
I've never heard that one before. Could you tell me which translation that one is?
NIV.
That's the NIV does that? Oh, NIV is usually better than that. That's just terrible. The word for thigh they're translating as womb. That's the second one. Yeah. And the first one, translating the first one abdomen, which does mean womb, but the abdomen, okay, because they always said belly in the old one. So I won't fight it. I think it's wrong, but I won't fight about it.
Yeah, it says it twice, like further up.
Right.
It has it switched. It says, may the Lord cause you to become a curse among your people when he makes your womb miscarry and your abdomen swell. And then it says it again, but then it like switches it again. Your abdomen swell and your womb miscarry. So it kind of...
that's just wrong every way, but... Yeah. And also to say miscarry, it's the word that... It's usually the Hebrew word for to fall. So I use the word sag because I was trying to use a word that really happens in bodies physically. Your leg doesn't fall. But they're taking the word fall and take that to mean miscarry. Now, it is true that the word for a miscarriage or an aborted fetus, biblically, is related to the word for to fall, because I mean, so it's been dropped, so to speak. And so they could make the case on that. They said it fell, so it miscarried. And that is one of the interpretations. People claim that it's not pregnancy that's the result, it's that if she was pregnant from the adultery, then she'll miscarry. But that involves a lot of interpretation, which apparently whoever was the translator, who got assigned, that chapter of Numbers, and one of the translators on the committee is going, me, can I have that one? I have a theory about that. And then works his theory into the translation. That's a very dangerous thing to do. Unless are there like footnotes or commentary at the bottom of the page, or is that just Bible itself? No. Yeah.
No. Really. I mean, it has one, but it's talking about like the curse.
No. Sometimes, Bibles, like my own, is not just a translation. It has comments at the bottom of each page. Then you can do all kinds of crazy things in translation because you have a chance to explain yourself to your readers at the bottom. But when you just do a translation and your reader doesn't know what's in your head when you do that, and you use a very eclectic translation like that, that gives you tremendous power over your readers. Translation is power. Everybody is seeing the Bible through your eyes when you do that. And, it's a tremendous responsibility.
That's kind of scary that it's like so...
I'm surprised, I actually don't know anybody who was on the NIV committee. I've known people who've been involved in some of the translations, and I did my own too, but I don't know. And I know a lot of students use NIV, so I'm concerned. Just in that one case. I mean, for the rest of the Bible, you use it, but in a way, now that I've been so critical of whoever did that translation, I can also try to bail that person out and say, look, the problem is that we really don't understand this complex law. So the translator's doing the best he can. For example, where I said you've slept with someone else in place of your husband, and I made a point of that, the text actually says if you've slept with someone else literally under your husband. Now, no, I don't think they did some kinky ménage à trois thing. That's not what happened. So most scholars translate it literally as under your husband, and they say it means under your husband's authority. Now, first of all, it's making assumptions about a woman being under a husband's authority, which have not yet been established in the ancient Near East. There are many laws where a woman is clearly not under her husband's authority. And secondly, I checked all occurrences of the word under in the Hebrew Bible, and it never means to be under somebody else's authority. It means in place of, instead of. It's a different term. For under a person's authority is the Hebrew under the hand of is the term for someone's authority. So that doesn't work. But yeah, translation is power, and translation is risk. But I wanted to do that with this law. I hope, I don't see looks on your faces like you had as much fun with it. Let's have fun. Let's study some Bible together. But to me, that works, All right, we left off at our last law in Deuteronomy, was in the famous line in Deuteronomy 16, justice, justice you shall pursue. Then there are laws about justice in the book of Deuteronomy. It says laws about appointing judges. It says you should appoint judges. It says you mustn't favor anyone. It says you mustn't take bribes. It says 2 witnesses to execute, as I mentioned. That's in Deuteronomy 17:6. When it talks about execution by stoning, it's interesting. It says the witnesses first, and then all the people after. Now notice that a lot of people miss the second half of it, but even on both halves are very important. If you're a witness in a trial and you give testimony that results in a person being convicted and they're going to be executed, you must participate in the execution yourself. Now that must have kept witnesses pretty serious. And so there's the thing, the 2 witnesses have to cast the first stones. That's a famous line that is picked up in the New Testament as well. Actually, you know the story of Jesus and the adulterous woman? See, Jesus was walking past the city gate. I don't get to tell New Testament jokes that often, so this is very exciting for me because I only do BC, So Jesus is walking past the city gate, and he sees this adulterous woman about to be stoned. So he stands between the woman and the crowd, and he says, "Let him who hath not sinned cast the first stone." And everybody looks very embarrassed and ashamed, and they're all dropping their stones and walking away. And this one little old lady comes running up with a big stone, and she throws it at her. And they all come back, and they stone the woman. And they're walking away feeling very, self-righteous and refreshed. And Jesus walks up to the little old woman, and he says, "Some days, Mom, you really tick me off." I've been telling that joke for 30-something years, and I haven't decided if it's a reverent or an irreverent joke. Anyway. So first of all, the witnesses themselves have to cast the first stones. But second, it says, and all the people thereafter. Nobody is walking up to the people of a town in ancient Israel and saying, okay, are you in favor of capital punishment or opposed to capital punishment? If you live in a community that has capital punishment, you participate in the execution. It says all the people thereafter. There's no saying, well, I'm against it. Or there's no saying, I'm for capital punishment, but no, I don't want to be the executioner. And I wonder how different many people's views would be of execution if they understood that if there's going to be an execution in my town, I've got to do it. In America, we can be theoretical about it because somebody else does it, in the states that do it. In the U.S., what is it, 30-something of the 50 states do have capital punishment, and the others don't. Most European countries now, Western Europe, don't do it anymore. But whatever I'm not trying to influence anybody's views about capital punishment one way or the other, but I'm saying that biblically, if you're going to be for it, you have to be willing to do it. Were you? Yeah.
Well, like in the state of Georgia, we have it, and when a person is executed, they're executed by the state of Georgia, which is, in theory, all of us.
And I understand that. And you could say, well, a majority of us at least agreed to have the law. So yes, in theory, in a state that, it's the state against the accused in any trial. But you still don't have to bring the thing and shoot the guy or gal with whatever that cocktail is that they use now. But we use cocktails now. When I was a kid, they still used electric chairs. And who invented the electric chair? Thomas Edison, because he was against capital punishment, and he thought that it was a more humane death than hanging or shooting.
Only one man has survived it.
Yeah.
And then they did it to him again.
I remember that case. That was in Florida, right?
Mississippi.
Oh, I thought it was Florida because they can never get anything right in Florida.
The chair through the entire power grid and shut it down.
Well, okay. I heard that the invention of the guillotine in France was the same thing. It was supposed to be a quicker, less painful death. But the point of this was, we've already discussed the fact that they did use execution for a lot of crimes biblically, but this part of it is that it's a very sobering attitude towards execution, that the witnesses have to do it and everybody has to do it. The law of the king. In Deuteronomy 17, is one of the most important laws there. So you really have to get this. Biblically, Israel is allowed to have a king. And this matters, you'll see later when we start reading the books of Samuel and Kings, there will be questions of when Israel got its first kings and what people felt about it. And some are for and some are against having kings. The chief priest of Israel in one case says, God is your king, you don't need a human king, but then gives them a human king anyway. But there are rules if you're going to have a king. Number one, it says it has to be someone whom God will choose. Now you go, how are we supposed to know who God picked to be the king? And when you look at the cases in the Bible, it certainly seems to mean prophetic designation. You have to be designated by a prophet, because a prophet is someone who conveys, what God wants. So you will see various cases in the Bible where the king is succeeded by his son, so that's automatic. The prophet will do the ceremony. Or sometimes a prophet will go and encourage somebody to overthrow the current king, and he's saying this comes from God, that you're supposed to overthrow the current king and you become king in his place. That's prophetic designation. But there are 2 or 3 cases where it says so-and-so is like just the general, and he overthrew the king and made himself king. And after each of the kings, they'll say something, and he ruled 21 years, or and he ruled 6 years. And whenever you get one of those cases, like somebody just overthrows the king without prophetic designation, it says, and he ruled for 2 weeks. And then he gets overthrown and killed. So apparently it is entirely likely, I can't prove it, but it's entirely likely that in ancient Israel this was really followed. If you didn't have at least the ability to make the claim that this wasn't just you making a power play, but that what you were trying to do was the will of God, then you had a chance at acceptance. But without it, forget it. Second rule is it can't be a foreigner. Only a native-born Israelite can be the king of Israel, which, that's in the American Constitution. The President of the United States has to be a native-born American. Third, he can't multiply for himself, make a lot of women, money, Silver and gold, it says. Or horses. Now, I know that those are the three big things on us guys' minds. Money, women, and horses. And you're going, what? Okay, so they can't have a tremendous amount of silver and gold. We can understand, and that's fascinating that the law is made saying that, the king can't just be out to get rich by being king. And not to have a lot of wives or women, wives, concubines. That will make sense. You'll read later there's the case of King Solomon, who said had 1,700 wives and 300 concubines. That's where you get the term a grand. And he and the wives are largely foreign. The difference between the 700 wives and the 300 concubines is the 700 wives are all princesses. They're daughters of various kings of all the cities in the area. And he basically did marriage diplomacy with basically every king in the Near East, was his father-in-law. And he marries all these women, but therefore they're coming from other countries. And they draw him to the religion from the countries where they came. So he builds temples to other gods. And the same thing you'll see with Captain Ahab, Gregory Peck, later, when his wife Jezebel, Betty Davis, who comes from, do you all know who Betty Davis? She had eyes, Betty. And do you all know the song Betty Davis Eyes? Anyway, when people don't even remember that, you can't go, well, you got to remember Betty Davis. Anyway, Jezebel turns Ahab to worship of Baal and Asherah, a goddess. So you could it says there he shouldn't have a lot of wives because they'll turn his heart away. So, okay. And then why not a lot of horses, though? The horses, in a way, relates to the silver and gold. They're on the feudal system. I mean, feudal, F-E-U, not F-U-T-I-L-E system, the F-E-U-D-A-L system. The feudal system in the ancient Near East, it governed in a lot of places. You've seen parts of it where there are the upper kings, the suzerains, and the lesser kings under them, the vassals. There's, in this economic structure and political structure, there are the few very wealthy at the top and the masses of poor serfs at the bottom. And in ancient Israel, when you look at a lot of these biblical laws, it seems that what they're after is to prevent that from developing in Israel. It's very close to what we mean by economic democracy. I want to be cautious because economic democracy is an actual term that people really use now to mean something somewhat different. But it was an attempt to keep the society from developing with just a few rich guys at the top and a bunch of poor guys at the bottom. So when you think about horses, in a horse economy, that requires the guys who own the horses have to be wealthy. And they need a core of people, serfs, to maintain the horses. So when you read about the King Arthur stories, it's not just that the knights go around rescuing damsels from dragons. The knights are the upper class. They have property and they have horses. And they ride the horses into battle on jousting and all that sort of thing. And they need land and staff, that's a nice word for it, staff, to maintain all of their horses. And it creates an economy where everything's at the top and not at the bottom. So later you'll see a case in the book of Samuel where King David defeats one of the neighboring countries to the east across the Jordan River, and it said he captured whatever it was, I don't remember, it was 500-600 horses or a couple thousand, whatever it is, and he hamstrings all but 200 of the horses. That, your hamstrings, you cut the tendon of the leg, deliberately hobbling the horse. And you go, why would a king do that? Horses are worth a fortune, and he's just captured this tremendous number of horses from an enemy, but instead of using them, he makes them hobbled so they can't be used anymore for battle or for any of that stuff. And the likely answer of why he did that is he was obeying the law of the king. He's not allowed to have a lot of horses. And you can say, why doesn't he sell them? Because he's not allowed to have a lot of silver and gold. Why can't he use them for all his wives to ride on? Because he's not allowed to have a lot of wives. That is to say, there are limitations on the king. And the last one is, it says the king has to write a copy of this law and keep it with him and read it all the days that he's on the throne, so his heart won't be raised up and above that of all his people. And it's unclear when it says he has to write this. It says he shall write this Torah, this instruction. It's unclear if that means he has to write out the law of the king and keep it with him, or does it mean that he has to write out all these laws in Deuteronomy and keep them with him. But there's some law code that the king has to write a personal copy of and keep it with him. This is not a small point. What you've just seen here is constitutional monarchy. And you'll have evidence of this later, that this really existed in ancient Israel. This is 1,000 years before the Romans, who we always credit with that sort of thing. It's constitutional monarchy. There are no absolute monarchs in Israel. Just because you're the king does not get you everything you want. That's tremendously important. Other laws. Deuteronomy 21. You can't rape a woman captive in war. Now, in war, I remember George Carlin of blessed memory used to say the purpose of war is to kill the other guys and take their stuff. And there is more. It's to kill the other guys and take their stuff and rape their women. And those of you who studied Homer and some of the Greek dramas, in the Greek world, they make it very clear that after the battles, after Troy, the kings get the best women, the princesses, and then the soldiers get the next ones and the next ones. And that rape of women is a basic, common function of war. They're defenseless, their men have been killed. And the Bible does not permit that. It protects that. Now, if it would just say, you're not allowed to rape the women on the other side after you win, the average soldier who's just been fighting all day in a battle, and now there's a beautiful woman in front of him, and there's nobody to stop him. You can't count on the fact he's going to say, oh, yeah, right, I have a Bible, and I'm okay. That's not quite enough. So the law doesn't exactly just say, all right, thou shalt not rape the woman. It says, if you see a beautiful woman among the captives, all right? If she had a husband, he's dead. If she had a family, they're gone. So if you see a woman in that situation, it says, you can marry her. You take her home to your house. She cuts her hair and her nails. Not clear why. Possibly to make her less attractive, possibly as a sign of mourning, possibly so she won't scratch your eyes out if you come after her. She cuts her hair and her nails, and she's allowed 30 days in your house where you can't touch her. She's allowed to mourn her father or her husband, anybody, those who were lost in the war. And then at the end of that, you can marry her. And if you don't marry her at the end of those, you have to set her free. You cannot sell her as a slave. You can't profit from her in any way. And you go, that's an amazing law, because now you've taken away that passion that occurs after a battle, after tremendous movements where you're in danger and all. And instead, it's only, marriage. Now, you could say it's not entirely fair to the woman. She didn't really have any say in this of whether you can take her as a wife or not. So that is still true. So you can say, this is one small step for a woman, but not yet a giant leap for womankind. And when people have these arguments, the Bible is good on the subject of women, the Bible is bad on the subject of women. And the ones who want to say that's good can pull out look, you can't rape the women, and all the other countries didn't have this law that you can't rape the women. But then somebody says, yeah, but you can force her to marry you. So what you do is some people just keep pulling out all the good stuff, and other people pull out the bad stuff. And it might be better to look at the text and say, well, what level is this in the development of relations between the balance between men and women? And the Bible's at a certain stage. And it's like, let's say it took 40 stages to get from men are totally in charge, women nothing, which probably never occurred on Earth, but that, to our enlightened stage where we're all equal and everything's fine. Yeah. That's why we've had all these female presidents and vice presidents and majority of the Supreme Court and all that. But let's say where we are is, let's say I take 40 stages to get, I want 40 because it's a biblical number, to get from stage 1 where women are downtrodden to stage 40 where everybody would agree it's great equality, terrific, respect for each other, all of that. And let's say we're at, where are we? Are we 32? Let's say. Let's say the Bible is at stage 18 out of 40. So in some ways, it's come a long way, and in some ways, there's still a ways to go. I don't think it's a meaningful argument for two people to be arguing. One saying, look, the Bible's terrible because they're only at stage 18, and the other person saying, wow, isn't the Bible great? Look, it's at stage 18 already. The Assyrians were only on stage 12. That's not, it's a good way to ruin a dinner evening having that argument. It'll get really nowhere. So I've never tried to make the argument that the Bible's enlightened with regard to women. I've never tried to make the argument that the Bible is a terrible male sexist thing. There's stuff in the Bible that's male sexist, it's chauvinist, and there's stuff in the Bible that's tremendously enlightening and is arguably a crucial step on the way to getting us toward stage 40. That's the best I can do. That's our sermon for the day. Does anybody want to get back to the lectures? Anybody want to say anything? Some of my best friends are women. I have nothing against women. My mother was one. You know. In Deuteronomy 22, there's a lot, no cross-dressing. I told you that I could see an opening for around the law against male homosexuality. I don't easily see a way around this one. And you say, well, what if it's just for fun? Sometimes in a play, at Harvard, the Hasty Pudding Society, every year it's all guys in drag. There's still movies, are we going to give up, Tootsie and Mrs. Doubtfire and, and I just saw a Dallas Buyers Club last night, so I guess that's on my mind. So cross-dressing, all I can tell you, it's forbidden, and it's both ways. On this one, it says a man shouldn't wear women's clothes, a woman shouldn't wear men's clothes. Now, I know some religious women, especially in the Orthodox Jewish community, won't wear pants as a result. My own sense of that is that's not necessarily correct. This is a law that really conveys that the law is relative, not absolute, because styles change. In biblical times, guys wore skirts. They did not wear trousers. But now we do. At various times, men and women have worn different kinds of clothes. So it seems to me, if you really believe in biblical law and want to follow biblical law, and law says no cross-dressing, that would have to mean whatever would be cross-dressing in the particular generation when you live, which would be, fascinating. Or if you think, no, the biblical law has to be unchanging, then you go, well, what do you do with an unchanging law related to fashion and style? There's almost nothing more constantly changing than that. I know because I used to watch Heidi Klum on that show with the runway and the Tyra Banks and America's Next Top Model, and so I know that fashion changes a lot. Deuteronomy 22, there's a law about sex with a betrothed virgin. This betrothal thing is often misunderstood by people. In biblical times, apparently the law was, or maybe just the practice was, when a couple got engaged, betrothed, that was much more than what we mean by engaged today. It wasn't you got a nice ring, and it was you two were committed to each other now, but you didn't do the marriage ceremony until 1 year later. So for 1 year, the couple, they don't have sex with each other, they don't live together, they're not married, but they're not unmarried either. So that's why you get these laws about if you have sex, if you're a guy and you have sex with a woman who is betrothed, on the one hand, she's only betrothed. She has not had the wedding ceremony yet. On the other hand, she and this man are committed to each other, and if you have sex with her, that's adultery, and you and she are both executed. Okay, so That's what's going on there. It's very important. Again, I'm not a New Testament scholar, but you have to understand that to get that in the New Testament, you're like, but if Mary is married to Joseph, why is she called the Virgin Mary, and why does she have a virgin birth? It's because she and Joseph, it's supposed to be there in that year. They are betrothed to each other, but they are not married yet. And that's why there's a question, in Joseph's mind when she's pregnant during that year, because they can't have slept together yet. And that law is no longer, that was practiced in Judaism well past that period and is not done anymore. Today, Jews, they get engaged, they get married whenever they get married. It's not the 1 year thing anymore. Now, it says there's two different situations. It's if you have sex with a betrothed woman, if it takes place in a city, you're both guilty and you're both executed. If it takes place out in a field, the man is guilty and he's executed and the woman is not guilty. And you go, what? But it's explicit why that law is. It says if it happens in a town, remember, if you've ever seen the houses and all that we've excavated in ancient Israel, they're tiny. Many of them would fit in this room. A family's life wasn't in the house. You were just there when it's raining or snowing or something like that. When you normally, the life of the family is in the courtyard, the grounds around the house. And so a house then was as big as would ever be a small room in your house today. I mean, well, you know what's the smallest room, but the second smallest. There was a famous response of a guy. Somebody had written a really negative, hostile review of his book, and he wrote a letter to the guy who wrote the negative review of his book, and he said, "Dear sir, I am seated in the smallest room in my house. I have your review before me. I shall soon put it behind me." You got to admit it's brilliant. I mean, So if she's in a city, therefore, because it's small houses near each other, they're saying she could call for help and somebody would hear her. But if she's out in a field, you don't know if it was a rape or consensual sex. There's no witnesses. They're out in the field. You can't tell. And therefore, there is a presumption in favor of the woman. The woman is assumed to be innocent. But the man, it doesn't matter, because whether he raped her or seduced her or just liked her and she slept with her, it doesn't matter. He's guilty no matter what. He slept with a woman who's betrothed. So the man gets no presumption of innocence, but the woman does. And again, you go, well, I mean, that's fascinating in terms of what you think of the biblical regard for women. I mean, this is a case that goes in the woman's favor. You know, there are places that have been in the news in the past year or two in the Middle East where the woman didn't get off quite so easily, where women really were raped and their families still killed them. So, Sex with a non-betrothed virgin, you're supposed to pay the father 50 weights of silver, which is a lot, and you marry her, and you're never free to divorce her. Divorce in the Bible is always in the hands of the man. A woman can't say, "I've had it with you, Harry, I'm out of here." Anybody named Harry? I don't want to. She can't. Women do not have the power to divorce their husbands. Only men can divorce their wives, biblically. But in this case, the man must marry the woman and can never divorce her. He loses that right. And the question is, but what if she didn't want to marry him? I don't know the answer to that. I assume since it's now become a matter between the man who slept with her and her father, she can go, "Dad, I don't love him. I don't want to be with him. Don't make me spend the rest of my life with this man." The father might honor his daughter's wishes. He might not. We guys are soft. I've only had daughters. I'm telling you, we can. In the most male-dominated society, men can still be protective of their daughters. In Arabic culture, a person like me is called an Abu Banat, a father of daughters, and that's not a good term. But I think it's cool to be an Abu Banat. Notice that there's no law describing the marriage ceremony. There are basically no laws about marriage. There's laws after you got married. what the husband and the wife do and can't do and all that. But there's nothing, you can't from the Bible figure out how to get married, what you say, who do you do, how many witnesses, and all of that comes later. There's Jewish law, there's Christian traditions about how to do that. But if you look in the Bible, you cannot find any laws about marriage. There are not really any laws of divorce. There's just this one case that says if a couple get divorced and the woman goes and is married to somebody else, and then she gets divorced from the second guy, she can never go back and marry the first guy again. Which obviously the Bible was written by someone who had never seen Dallas or any daytime television, where they constantly, Erica married and divorced many times. You've forgotten Erica? It's only been a few years since that one went. Never mind. All my children. But there's no laws otherwise about what's the ceremony or what you do about divorce. You can only try to derive it from that one case. There's similarly no real laws about birth and naming of children, all that sort of thing. There's only the practice of circumcision if it's a male on the 8th day, but nothing else. And there are no laws about puberty. Look, there are, in psychological and good Freudian terms, there are 4 main moments in life: birth, puberty, marriage, and death. All of those very broadly defined. Well, birth and death are not very broadly defined, but marriage might just mean union. Puberty, in Jewish law, that's bar mitzvah, the ceremony that usually takes place when today, most places where it's when boys and girls are 13. Among Orthodox Jews, it's boys are 13 and girls at 12. And the reason why it's younger for girls is because if you remember middle school, which I know you've been trying desperately to forget, in middle school, girls on average tend to mature physically before boys do. And it was a puberty right. It's celebrated. You're physically really becoming an adult, which happens around that age. And in biblical times, they didn't do it on your birthday. They checked you. And it's when you started to have pubic hair that's when you'd have your bar mitzvah. And I assume the reason they stopped doing it that way is that could be really embarrassing. You know, if you're, not everybody has puberty at the same age, and some people it's very late or super early, and they're checking you and then having a party and everybody's giggling and your friends are making fun of you. And what we all should have is cryogenics, that they all just put us asleep from 6th grade to 8th grade, and then we wake up in our bodies and then we just get back to life. That would be much better. My daughter told me she wanted to be a middle school teacher. I said, don't you remember middle school? But anyway, there's no mention of bar mitzvah or for a girl bat mitzvah anywhere in the Bible. And finally, death. There's nothing in the Bible about how to do a funeral, how to do a burial, how to treat the body. They just don't have a lot of that. And I said, but how could that be? Birth, puberty, marriage, and death are 4 of the main things of life, and almost all religions do something, ceremonies or something, to sanctify it, to take notice of it. And it could be that just in ancient Israel they did something, but everybody just knew what it was you did on those occasions, and they didn't bother to put it in the law. Or else they just didn't think you needed laws about that. When a person died, the community or the family did whatever they wanted to do. And there wasn't. Today in Judaism, there's very elaborate laws about funerals and what you do with bodies and all that sort of thing. And there's a definite, with many stages, wedding ceremony. But none of that is in the Bible. Another few laws I'm picking out. I admit I have to pick and choose because I don't get to name all 613 laws and spend as much time on them as I did on the adulterous woman case, There's a law that says you can't abhor an Edomite. Now, who are the Edomites? Remember, Edom, E-D-O-M, is one of the countries to the east of Israel, across the Jordan River and across the Dead Sea. It's like the southern part of what is today Jordan. And the Edomites are the descendants of Esau. And most of the biblical period, Israel and Edom did not have good relations. There were wars. Sometimes they were allies. Sometimes they were opponents. For a couple of hundred years, they were conquered and subjugated by the Jews. The relationship between Edomites and Jews is not good. And there's this explicit law saying a Jew can never look down on an Edomite. If you're at war with each other and you have to fight, okay, you fight, but you don't hate them. And in that same verse, it's Deuteronomy 23:8, it says you can't abhor an Egyptian. And you go, well, for heaven's sakes, they enslaved us for hundreds of years. Don't we get a little abhorrence for that? And the answer is no, you don't. These are extraordinary things. Yeah, but did you? Yeah.
So when David conquers the Edomites, that's okay.
That's okay.
It's basically like not racism, but like ethnicism, basically. Like
You can't hate them specifically.
No, I would say it's just warism. I mean, it's when.
I mean the laws against.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
David doesn't hate the Edomites. He goes to battle with them because there's an initial event where the Edomites, they do something that hurts and humiliates the Judeans, and there's a war. But even when you're at war with them, you can't hate your enemy. You have to fight. I mean, if your life's in danger, you're allowed to fight to protect yourself. But it is not a war of we're going to get you guys because we hate you because you're lower than we are. It's not that. And the same with the Egyptians. You'd think, they weren't very nice to us, but even if they abhor you, you can't abhor them. That's tremendously important, and people think of the notion that you have to love your enemy as a New Testament notion, but it's in both Testaments. That you just can't do it. Later in that same chapter, there's this famous one, Deuteronomy 23:19. In verse 19 it says, when you're making a donation to the temple, you can't bring the price of a prostitute or the cost of a dog, it says. And you go, what? In some translations, it's the hire of a prostitute or the price of a dog. What in the world is that supposed to mean? Look, if the going rate with a prostitute is $50, and you come to the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, and someone says, how much do you pledge? And you go, $50! And all the guys kind of chuckle and giggle. It's insulting. It is demeaning to the temple. It's disrespectful. And I think that's what's meant here. It says you don't bring the price of a prostitute. It means whatever is the going rate for that should not be the rate you pick for, something sacred. And then you go, what's this about the cost of a dog? Dogs didn't cost anything. In ancient Israel, dogs were not yet domesticated. They were wild animals who lived, on the edges of town and, went after garbage or whatever. But there's no domestication of dogs yet. So what are they talking about? So understand that the usual understanding of this verse is that dog was a very, very negative term for a male prostitute. A reference being to anal intercourse as dogs do. And so what this law is saying is you don't bring the price of a female prostitute, you don't bring the price of a male prostitute to the temple. And it's really a very harsh, it's like using a terrible word for a person of another race or another sexual view today, but there it is in the Bible. So you have all these laws in Deuteronomy, and then, yeah?
Sorry. Why were male prostitutes so down upon? Was it because the men were going to male prostitutes, or were women going to male prostitutes?
All right, so the true answer to that is I don't know. I suspect that they were referring mostly to male homosexual prostitution. And the reason I say that is because the term dog, and dogs do, intercourse from behind, and so that's probably what they're alluding to, which would more likely be two men. Yeah, I think that makes it more likely that they meant male homosexual prostitutes. As for the question about whether, a wealthy woman could go to a male prostitute, well, they could do it normally because prostitution isn't illegal in Israel. And whether, but again, if there's a going rate for women who have their gigolos or whatever they were called, they wouldn't be allowed to they'd be forbidden by this to donate that amount of money to the temple. It would be like icky. It's on the TV show Friends, that was called The Ick Factor by Monica Geller. It's just it's icky, you know. So I'm glad the Bible appreciates ickiness, and try not to be icky in your religion. You know. So what we will do next time is see Moses' last words, his death, the end of these first 5 books, and then we move on to a whole new section with the book of Joshua.